player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're doing the Zidane character review, one of the new Final Fantasy IX units added to the game. So let's kick things off. I've added something very new that a lot of people have wanted for quite some time. I'm changing up part of the presentation. Toward the very end here, I'm taking out the Esper synergies, and I'm actually going to talk about a sample build, and then I'm going to talk about Truststones again, where there's a demand for some visibility to that. I thought it might be intuitive at this point in the game, just given how long it is, but it never hurts to get a refresher on things and see just a recommendation at the least. So I am going to start adding this in here. It's a little rough in the bare bones at the moment, but hopefully still a fun exercise to walk through. But pretty standard stuff. The character overview, base and total stat analysis, running through all those stats, leading up to the report card where I grade those stats, kind of talk about them in the context of the rest of his kit and abilities. We'll talk about the general thoughts where I can flesh out some things that I really want to hyper focus in on. We'll run through quicker than average the passives, counters, job abilities, and auto priority. We'll talk about his TMR, the job-based vision card eligibility, and then the weapon optimization, sample builds, and Truststones, bringing that back into the fold. So kicking things off, a brand new wind unit added to the game. They gave them the unique main job of Honorable Thief with the High Dragoon and Operative subjobs. High Dragoon is one of the newer jobs added to the game as of late. It's a very interesting choice for him. They've given him the dagger as a weapon with the hat, cloth, and accessory. He's got a move of 3 and a jump of 2 innately. Haven't seen a character with a jump of 2 in just a little while here, but he is a 100 cost unit, and my faith recommendation is 50 for him. He doesn't really rely on a ton of external healing in the builds that I'm envisioning for him. He doesn't have any real status effects to look out for in terms of using them. There's a job uniqueness. They've given him a max range of 6 squares away on one of his abilities. He's got 1 AoE and 3 single target abilities. From a resistance standpoint, he's kind of up and down on a few of these. He's got a couple noticeable double digits. The strongest one is 20% to magic, which is a little bit of his counter niche, if you will. He's got 15% both strike and slash. Those are the 3 most prevalent damage types in the game, so really good starting spot there. He's got minus 10% to missile and minus 5% to pierce. In terms of ailments, again, not something you have to really be terribly worried about. 50% to poison is great for a lot of the new poison characters we've seen come into the game. 50% to berserk as well, which we have seen an uptick not only from the Vega TMR, but even when you consider a lot of the characters in the fire element that tend to have that, and 10% to blind. Now for the mastery ability, they gave him 10 unit res innately and 20 reaction block rate. They gave him more reaction block rate on the 140, getting him another 20 there, and acquired AP of 30%. That reaction block rate is a unique thing for him, that he tends to have a very high amount of permanent reaction block rate, which is actually really great for a lot of counter abilities that we're seeing nowadays, which have these extremely high proc rates. Think of someone like Raph, or I think even Reagan, where it's like 70% chance to reduce all slash damage. Like, this is a great way to mitigate some of that, but we'll talk more about that soon. From the stat overview, the base HP, he's kind of in the middle of things, a little bit on the higher side, but not terribly so. I wouldn't call him a bulky unit, but he's maybe just a smidge below where some of the more recent damage dealers are post their anniversary. But overall, in the scheme of the game, still a very healthy base HP starting point. I don't think that's a weakness at all. From a base attack perspective, he's kind of in that casual bucket here that we're seeing toward the top. He's not the strongest attack stat in the game, but he does have a couple passives that will still bump it up. His attack stat does still get relatively high. So overall, base attack in a good spot. Base agility, he definitely skews on the higher side of things, and this is something they've really leaned into for his build. We'll talk about agility, obviously, throughout a bunch of these slides to come, but base agility definitely skews higher in one of these buckets. The base dexterity is kind of in the middle, a little above the median, really more toward that 75th percentile of units, but he's not a strong base dexterity character, which is kind of interesting that he's actually a very high crit damage oriented unit, so I'm surprised they went just a little bit lower on this, but overall, not the worst starting spot. And then base luck, he is put into this higher bucket here as well, where he's well above that 75th percentile. Another unit in a line of recent units that tend to have very high base luck. Now, as we sort of transition those 5 charts into one, you're looking at the base stats, really no innate weaknesses. He starts off in a pretty good spot for all of these major 5 categories. When we look at the total stats, when you include the board nodes, the mastery abilities, things of that nature, no real enormous shifts. He gets relatively better from an agility perspective, maybe a step down on both the luck and HP, but overall, he's in a really good spot for beginning total stats overall. And that 9 agility isn't enormous, but when you consider how high his base agility is to start, he does end up on the higher spectrum of things here, all things considered. Now for the agility, when we talk about with passives, with no passives, this is a very interesting thing when you start including the vision cards there, where you see that base agility start to yield some of its upsides. He comes in at around 84 agility with no passives when you have these vision cards equipped. That's near top of the charts, and he is top of the chart when you do include the passives. He is technically the fastest UR character in the game with his passive equipped. And if you were to, graph that again visually, where a lot of these other characters tend to bucket themselves, he ends up on the higher spectrum of things. If you don't have that equipped and keep him at the 84, he still ends up in this, third highest level here, which is still very, very much above average. So agility definitely a strong point of his. The crit hit and crit avoid, crit hit to start, not a great spot in my opinion, considering some of the upside they attempted to achieve with him. I wish this was like, I don't know, 20 points higher, but not the worst starting spot. The crit avoidance is pretty average overall. Really no remarks here in general. The accuracy was really the big first weakness in my opinion, where he does not have any accuracy passives. He's got no guaranteed hit. He's got no buffs to increase accuracy. He starts off at like average accuracy. When you include him in the mix of characters when they can start equipping passives, he falls like 6 points behind the average. So I'd consider him a very inaccurate unit, which actually is a kind of surprising thing given how high his base luck is. I just kind of would have expected it ended up in a different spot than it did. But yeah, accuracy, nothing to write home about. And then when we look at evasion, he is definitely in the middle of that gradient, considering when you start equipping passives, because he does have a passive that has an evasion percent on it. You likely won't have that on, so this is a little bit overstated at the moment. But even if you were to ratchet that down, he's still around that 120%. It's still a relatively decent spot for evasion. He does have a buff for it on the operative sub job. There's certainly luck cards that you could probably give him. Overall, I could see him evading a fair amount of things if you build him for that. But now when we break into the report card, so overall effective HP, I'm going with a C here. It's relatively average, all things considered. No defense or spirit innately, no AoE res. He's only got that 10 unit res to really bump up some of that effective HP. And his resistances, although they're strong, that 20% magic and the 15% to strike and slash, those are relatively easily penetratable nowadays. So although they look high in those double digits, they're really not effectively as high in practice. And so, it kind of falls back down to earth a little bit here. The survivability, though, I'm going with a B. It's not amazing. It's good, but it's niche. I think that's what I want to try to get across here, that he's got 25 unit res on a teammate buff. He can give himself courage. That's a great thing, but we've seen a ton of courage removal. He does technically have, for the first time in the game, kind of like Helena and VV incoming, a way to seal an enemy's courage removal ability. So there is some counterplay that they may not be able to remove that courage on him. And he does have a 25% reduced magic damage for 3 turns on his main buff. He also has a great buff on the Hydra Goon that we're going to talk about in a couple slides, and a good counter ability to reduce damage as well. This survivability grade, in practice, it's not as bad as a B. It's just a little bit niche, all things considered, in terms of stress testing him against a variety of different scenarios, in my opinion, particularly when you're talking about how to utilize his buffs best, because he does have that jump of 2 and the very high speed. You're not going to typically get all of these at once, and because his effective HP is only average, these are good, but they're not exceptional. So overall is a B. But the damage, I'm going with an A- here. This is one of the most complex thing about this character, though. He does have up to 40 defense pen or slash resistance pen on his passives. He does get another 40 slash res pen on a buff. The TOR item, which is coming in a couple weeks, very important for him, gives him 30 defense pen. He's very crit damage reliant for some of his real upside. He does have a reliable barrier break, though, which is very, very good to see. And he does get an additional potential 10 defense pen on his vision card that was just released this week. So we're going to talk way more about this in the next slide, but overall damage is in a good spot. His attack stats are very, very high. From an agility perspective, going with the A- here, in his base form, he's at 84 agility versus the 78 average. With passives, bumps him up to 91, which again is the highest in the game, versus the 81 average. So agility is in a really good spot. You will not always have the agility passive on, though, but when I'm building my Zidane here to start testing, I really am going to try to emphasize doing so, and that's the sample build I'm going to show you, a way to potentially get around shifting some of the passive abilities. The accuracy, going with a D+. Again, average to below average accuracy, no guaranteed hit. Really a critical weakness in his kit overall. I don't even think it's salvageable, quite honestly. The evasion, though, also going with a B here. He's got some decent evasion potential. You would need the extra passive potentially. The operative buff gives him 25%. The vision card support is semi there, but he has the base luck stat that he could certainly scale well with it. And the movement perspective, I'm going with a B+ here. The jump +1 innately, having a total jump of 2 is excellent. He's also got a move +1 passive, but I'm kind of skipping ahead here. His passive abilities are kind of locked to 2 of them, so although the optionality is there, Probably not going to see it in practice as often as you would like, but it's certainly nice that it's there. Now, the auto ease of use, this is where I think I have the biggest concern about Zidane, is I'm going with a C-. The defense pen and the slash res pen is tough to get right considering all the builds. The survivability matchup is kind of a niche and tough to toggle too in terms of what you equip and anticipate to see. So I don't think he's a slam dunk unit that most people can just like plug and play. I think some people could get caught up on getting him in a spot that's really usable at the top end of the game. Now, the game disruption, I will go with a B- though. He's got an immediate upgrade to wind, in my opinion. The courage seal is obviously very unique. It's great versus soul that we're seeing. Overall, magic is coming in very strong, and he does have a great anti-magic build, all things considered, that I think, this is a good time for him. There's really no ice in the game prevalently either to really keep him on the sideline. So yeah, I'll give it to him. If you actually know how to use this unit, I actually think you could get some decent game disruption out of him. Now, the passive ability is going with a B here. He's got great versatility in the passives, but he's just semi-locked to 2 of them. He's got some other good ones, but you'll see it's hard to get around not using the 2 of them. I have some creative ways to do so, but we'll see if they end up working in practice. The counter ability is going with a B here. He has a great slash and strike damage reduction counter, which, you see those 2 types of damage everywhere. The overall kit, I'm going with a B here. He's got good buffs, good imperils potentially on his 120. He's got some good damage cleaving capabilities, but just neutered impact in my opinion. I don't think there's anything that's really going to blow the doors off anything here. For a final grade of a B+ here. Now, he brings some really good things versus the Soul, Helena, and Alaya teams that we're seeing throughout most of the top end of the game. The Rainbow team is a little tough for right now. There's no real holes in him per se, but he does seem more tuned for the current game in my opinion, not necessarily the long game. He's got some huge exposure to AoE type damage, which is kind of coming back into the fold. That courage sealing ability too is kind of unreliable. There's plenty of times where you don't hit an enemy with it and they end up removing your courage anyway. So, overall, I think he's very solid, but if you end up passing on him, I really don't think it's going to affect your gameplay experience a whole ton. Now, for the general thoughts, I want to really hyper focus on the defense pen and the slash res pen for a second. So we'll start with the defense pen here. You have a few options on how you want to build this. You can either get 40 on his passive ability, you can get 30 from the TOR accessory that's coming in a couple weeks. You can get 10 from a Truststone passive. You can get 10 from a set bonus if you go attack set, which I never recommend. I really go for agility almost always. He's one of the few units where I would explore that though, so I'm going to keep that on the table. Or you could get 20 from the Ultros Esper, which honestly is a good option for him. So you have a variety of ways to build up your defense pen. For a sweet spot in the game right now, I gotta say at least like 60 to 80 defense pen. Any less than that, you're basically just at average. 50 is the average for all units nowadays. And then when you particularly consider characters like Squall or Summer Glaciella that can reduce your defense pen, if you're only at 50 and they reduce you down to 20, that's a really tough hole to dig out of. So I'm trying to aim for anywhere from like 60 to 80 optimally for him. The easiest way to do with the passive, but I think you can get creative by taking off the passive and using some of these other ways, which we're going to talk about in the sample build. The slash res pen is equally a difficult thing to do, where you get 40 from a passive, you can get 40 from a teammate buff, but it's only for 3 turns. It is dispellable, so while for those 3 turns he's going to be in a healthy spot, it can fade. It's something to be careful of. You can get 10 from a Truststone passive, and there are 2 different vision card options for him. You have the Wind vision card, the Exorcist vision card that has 35 penetration on it, or you can get 28 penetration from the Lunar New Year Resnick vision card, which a lot of people pulled and basically no one's ever used. This is one of the first times you actually likely will get some good upsides out of it though. So my opinion, you want to probably stick that passive and keep that passive on at the very least. The teammate buff is good for those initial couple turns. I would absolutely recommend the Truststone passive, and depending on the team you're running, it wouldn't hurt to have one of these 2 in the sub slot just to make sure he stays in that anywhere from 60 to 100 range. That's really the sweet spot for a lot of the slash res pen. Now, the crit damage, we're going to talk about one of his abilities, is very important for some amplification of his damage. It's a big part of his PvE upside too, where, a long story short, the way this ability works is that when an enemy gets critically hit, they normally get an extra modifier added in the damage equation. It's usually at minimum 25 extra crit damage, and then whatever else you have. What this will do though, it will amplify the modifier they receive in the crit damage formula. So if someone normally only takes 25 crit damage, this will increase that by 20%. So it increases the modifier. It's not a huge damage upside, but it is something that would properly leveraged, still be a decent amount of extra damage. Now I will say he does have a strong anti-soul niche and magic too, to an extent, but he's got that 35 unit resistance after his buff, 50% poison res innately, that 25% reduced magic damage on buff. He can seal enemy courage removal, which is one of Soul's big things, and he's got 70% reaction block permanently for Soul's slash reduce counter, or slash damage reduction counter, which is a great way that Soul survives against that damage type. Zidane basically makes sure that that percentage is greatly neutered all the time before you even add in vision card. Now, another great thing he has going for him is great AP management. He's got 30% acquired AP on that 140. His limit break also grants a 30% AP reduction, and a couple of his buffs grant AP as well. So overall, really good from an AP management perspective. Dagger as a class is in a little bit of a tough spot vision card wise and unit wise in the moment. Those units aren't very powerful, but it doesn't take much to really change that. But just for now, it's currently a slight concern. The lack of accuracy is a major downside in my opinion, though. There's really no way to recover from that, and you really have to sacrifice some of your build in order to get him up to that. The fastest character we've seen, though, that's definitely a nice feather in his cap. The Hydra-Goon subjob is a very interesting subjob. I love it because of how much Pierce overlap there is, not only in Wind, but in Zidane's potential vision card synergies as well. And he's great for PvE. He's got a unit res in peril. He's got some of that crit damage amplification, which is great for high scores. He does have a couple of those double hits. Overall, I think he's a fast enough character that he will add some PvE upside for your win teams. Now for the passive abilities, this is where you look at these top two. This is your slash res pen and your defense pen for 40% each. Also get 24% attack buffs on each too, so both of these greatly increasing his damage. I do think the Hydra-Goon focus is one to really try to work in here though, and if I were to do so, I would remove the defense pen one first and use this agility passive and get my defense pen from those other alternative sources like the Ultros Esper, the Vision Card, the Truststones. So we'll talk more about that soon, but I think these are the three to focus on. The Knife Guard is that other counter ability that I was talking about. That's the 70% chance to proc to reduce slash and strike damage by 30%. I like this one best out of the three. From the buff perspective, that teammate buff that he starts off with is an extra 20 crit damage. It's 25 single target res. It's 20 wind resistance, and that 40 slash res pen. I like the crit damage aspect here. I wish it was crit rate in here too, though, because again, there's really no crit rate passives or anything. I think he could get that buffed up a little bit considering how much he wants to try to be a crit hit monster. The other single target buff, though, is the courage for self, the magic barrier. It's the sealing of courage removal on an enemy when you hit them for 3 turns, and a 15 flat AP just given to you at once. So I like that buff a lot. From the main job here, you have a lot of good ones here in terms of the punishing blade to start off with, and looking at the range and heights here, the only downside in my opinion of this job is that this Punishing Blade is a 6 range ability, and the rest of them are only 3. I wish there wasn't such a disparity between the two of them. I wish Punishing Blade was more of like a 5 range, and then the 3 range on the other ones. I just don't like the huge baitable potential where we've seen even characters like King Bradley that have the same AoE style. There's a lot of times that you just get beaten early in terms of attacking with this before you might want to. But overall, it's a great ability. It breaks physical barriers. It decreases healing power. It adds a follow-up attack here, which we've seen great things for anti-courage in terms of removing courage and just amplifying damage. The Intimidator is the ability I was talking about that decreases the enemy's crit damage resistance, so it basically amplifies the modifier of the crit damage. This also reduces their crit evasion by 25. It's double hit. It's his highest modifier here at 200%, but you're also going to be using Annoy a lot, which is the 20% unit resistance in peril. All 4 of these abilities are relatively good. There's enough utility in here between the healing power down and the unit resistance down that I think overall he was in a good spot from the main job. Now the Limit Break, I actually really like this. It's a 5 square away ability. It's a 20% physical damage increase for 3 turns, and the reduction of AP consumption for 30% for 3 turns. So, great buff for him to really, do the damage early in the fight that he wants to. When we look at the sub job, this is not a great sub job, unfortunately. Bewildering Blade is kind of whatever. The Sacrifice to me is a very odd ability. This is like, I don't know, either manual PvP or maybe I don't even want to say PvE, because most PvE content, the requirement is that no one dies, and so this kills himself and restores HP and AP to allies. This is a very odd ability. I don't like this sub-job at all for him. The Hydra-Goon, though, I think is a good one for this buff here. That's a 40% attack buff, 20 defense, and protect. So you talk about an alternative angle of survivability here. I think it's tough to get 3 buffs off in this current game, but given his agility and how fast it is, certainly possible. But I do like the Pierce synergy here. Now, I did run some tests on if you had a Truststone passive to reduced cast time of 200. Drain Jump does not change no matter what. Dragon Lance will technically go from 4 ticks down to 3 ticks though. There's really not a lot of good ways to make this faster. So although I really like the sub job, the thing that I really like it for is just being able to maybe weave in these pierce attacks, because out of the 3 sub jobs, I think this is my favorite. Again, he's got some good overlap with the pierce units in general, not only in wind, but from the vision card synergy as well. I think 30% pierce in peril, or the ability to drain enemies' HP, particularly by the concept that he can stay in the air and not get hit by enemies while he's in the air, I think is an interesting part of the survivability as well. I haven't tested it fully yet, but out of the 3 sub jobs, I think I like this best because the operative sub, normally this is a great one because it has that buff that is the physical shield and the AP regen. Zidane does not have that buff on here though. Toxic Assault is really the only thing I like here. It's the reduced counter chance of 100, which is kind of redundant for him. It helps your teammates, but for Zidane in particular, no real big upside. The slash in parallel 25 is okay. Certainly nice to keep doing the damage, and the poison chance is definitely nice here too. Overall, there's not a lot of that I really like on this, other than maybe leaning into the evasion aspect of it, which again is a totally different hurdle for Zidane. It doesn't really come natural, but it's certainly there if you wanted to use it. Which brings us finally to the TMR review. This TMR, you got 4 different primary stats on it. I would have liked it if it had some agility, but not every accessory can have agility here. The effect itself is a 35% physical shield, which is okay. The thing that's nice about this is that because it's a physical shield, Zidane will use it because he only has a magic shield on that main job. The accuracy of 30 is certainly nice considering how inaccurate he is, but overall, I think this is probably a tough one to weave into most rotations for characters. It's not the worst accessory. I just don't see a ton of upside for it. I feel like you're probably better off just using the Black Rose Helena. TMR, the accuracy of 30 is nice, but man, that's a really intentional build you have to go with. I think there's much easier ways to hit evade units if that's something you're worried about. But for the job-based vision cards now, there's a couple good ones here. You have, at minimum, the Greater Demon here for the agility percent, which you always look for. You also have Zidane's new unique vision card, which is the unit resistance. The nice thing about these cards is that the mace class is also on both of them. So when you talk about rainbow teams, being able to put dagger with mace and use both these is a nice starting spot. The rest of these cards are okay. They're very damage heavy. You have the area resistance one on the Sylvie vision card, but I don't see a ton of potential overlap with Zidane teams with that. Theoretically, you talk about the evade build, you have that Elena vision card as well. So there's some stuff here that I think you can play with, but I think it's more difficult than average to get these vision cards to work in your favor. But now for the weapon optimization. They've given him the Mage Masher unique weapon here. I like this weapon best, quite honestly. I do think the aim build is a decent one considering you get that free 20 accuracy. I don't think it's nearly enough to hit evade units, but in my opinion, he's the kind of inaccurate that he'll miss on characters that he probably shouldn't. And the fact that you can give 20 accuracy here, I actually don't hate that total amount. He's got enough attack stat that I don't think the difference between 60 attack of the assault and the aim is really going to change his build, but that 20 accuracy certainly might. Now for the unique effects here, there's 15 crit rate, 30 reaction block rate, and 8 AoE resistance with 15 slash attack. I don't really think there's many other competitive daggers here. The only other one is from the Reliquaries quest, where that's initial AP of 25. It's a reduce hate of 4, which actually for Zidane isn't the worst for him. I just think you're missing out on that AoE resistance and the reaction block rate, which I think is really strong for him. There's a reason why this Assassin's Dagger is not widely used, because it's really good, but it's really not overpowering. And the Feather Bastillard, if you were to +6 this, there's a take on this that agility of 15% only till you get hit once is nice, where you consider how fast he is. This could certainly be used in many builds, but I just think is inferior to the Mage Masher from a consistency perspective. Now, I do want to talk about the TOR item here, because I think this is a really important thing for him in the future, where number one, it gives him unit res of 10, gives him crit evasion of 20, it will give him 30 defense pen, which is the highest you can get on one of these items, and 20 human killer, while also getting the 15 accuracy. Now, if you are equipping this, I would recommend going with the assault version of Mage Masher. This 20 accuracy and that 15 accuracy will not stack well together, so in that instance, go with the assault version of the Mage Masher. But I want to highlight this because this piece of equipment is very important for the build that I want to walk through. Now, I just flashed the totals on the screen, but I do want to walk this systematically. I made a team here that's Zidane, Glaciella, and Sadali, going with the mono wind angle here for a moment. These vision cards that are in yellow are flexible, meaning in my opinion, you can probably replace them with whatever you want. I am using the new Zidane vision card here, where again, if you're going to really prioritize this unit, the vision card is one you really should go after as well. Now, the reason why I have these other vision cards here, I like this holiday party one. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a gift like no other. But the thing that's really nice about this, it's the attack 50%, it's a crit rate of 13, and HP 25%. I think all those things Zidane wants. I think for that sub vision card, I end up going with the Golden Arm in there, where the Golden Arm gives him a little extra of that magic res, which is his niche, but also gives more attack and dexterity as well to really jack up that potential crit rate for him. And then I really like having that Near Automata card, which I know at this point many people likely missed out on, but there's a lot of luck on that vision card, which is great for his accuracy. It's also got crit damage on it as well, so you talk about really leaning into that crit damage perspective. I think that's a good overall card for him. There's some flexibility there. I have the Odin Esper on him technically right here, but I think Ultros is a very good second option. I even think a Bahamut is a good option, or Dark Bahamut, I mean, and even Dark Odin. Again, if you're going for that evasion build, you're going for some of the magic resistance or the human killer there. But for the equipment, I have the Mage Masher. This is the TOR item. Now, this item is not in Wood of Calic at the moment, so regardless, I put the Zizabels on him for the speed for now, but I want to point something out here. I really went for the high agility Zidane build here, where I only put the 40 slash res pen. I did not put the 40 defense pen here. I have his agility percent buff up here, where I really want to maximize that speed factor. And for the Truststones, I went with the HP set here. HP and luck of 10%. You can fill out the other 4 passives, whatever matchup you're seeing. I think the luck set is also a very valuable one here. Again, not only for evasion, but also really for the accuracy, which is a legit weakness. I think the luck set is a very, very good secondary alternative here. I went for the attack set here on the right set, though. Again, I don't normally do this. He's a little unique, though, and for the passives, you know, that TOR item gives him 30 defense pen, so it will not stack on a Truststone passive. So for now, I went attack 20%, acquired AP, crit damage, dex, and then wind attack and slash res pen. Now in total, when you start looking at all those stats, there's a lot of numbers here, but I'll walk through some of them. A couple things to keep note of. Number one, the defense and spirit stat are not up to date because I did not pick a build for the TOR item. Whether you go defense or spirit on this will change these values. So you'll either add or remove about 10 or 12 to each one of these. So defense or spirit could be a little bit higher, but you look at the HP, 10,500 is definitely a really good starting spot for a damage dealer. The attack of 1722 is also very, very healthy for an attack stat, but I really want to hone in on this 121 agility. That is way faster than most characters you see currently as of this week in the game. Most characters are in the, low 100s, maybe in the teens of the 100s. And remember, if you go for the agility set here instead of the attack stat, you're going for 127 agility, which is bonkers fast for a unit. So I like leaning into that. I really tried to emphasize getting his dexterity up here. Right now he's got 40 unit res, 28 AoE res, 70 reaction block rate, 50% acquired AP. In terms of some of the offensive stats, in this current build, he's got 50 defense pen and 50 slash res pen. But if you sub out this Odin Esper, that 50 defense pen will go to 70, which I think is better, quite honestly. But not everyone has the Ultros Esper, so I'm going for Bahamut for conservatism. But I really think that 70 defense pen is a sweet spot for him. The weapon pen, 50 innately is a smidge low, but I'm just kind of considering when you add that buff of his that gives him the 40 for 3 turns, gets him up to 90, that's a pretty good spot. I'm not terribly worried about that. And that's one of those instances where maybe you sub out one of these vision cards here in the sub slot. Maybe instead of the Near card, you go for Exorcist instead, or you go for that Lunar New Year more card potentially. But overall, I think it's a pretty healthy build, all things considered, when you talk about where a lot of these stats are. For now, I'm just focusing on a mono wind team. I really love the combination with him with Glaciella. Not only do they have a lot of great mono wind overlap, but even a little bit on the Rainbow Vision card. And Sadali in particular is a mace unit, which I pointed out before is great for some of the Rainbow teams here. This Final Fantasy X Vision card actually affects all 3 of them, despite the fact that it's typically a weapon-based Vision card. They all are active on that card, so I really like this as an upgrade to something like Dark Tetrasylphid, which is the other wind unit res Vision card, or just a generic Odin Vision card from, 4 years ago at this point. Overall, I think it's a relatively well-rounded team. Slash, Pierce, Magic, Sadali's got Missile. You're really well-rounded here and covering a lot of bases. So I'm just going to leave this one here for now for my first sample build that I've done. I could probably do a couple more, but I also want to manage the time in this video appropriately. But the last thing here for the Truststone recommendations, HP or luck, as I said, I don't have it listed here on the infographic, but luck is definitely a good one. The thing with the left side, it's always matchup specific, always. What elements are you facing? What status ailments do you want to look out for? HP and luck are at minimum ones you should always have no matter what, but everything other than that is subjective. For the right side here, I do recommend either attack or agility. I think this pairing of attack 20% and acquired AP is certainly a good one. The crit damage of 10 and the dexterity 15 is certainly a good one. There are some others you can certainly layer in here that are very valuable as that last two on the options. I love the slash res pen and the wind attack 10. That's probably my third favorite one here. But if you're not using the TOR item, put the defense pen 10 back in there. The pierce attack 10 is really interesting if you're leaning into that Dragoon sub job with the glass yellow synergy. But really, this is a pretty healthy mix of things you should look for. And that's the Zidane character review overall. Hopefully in-depth and informative, a little bit different here. This is a character that, is a good character. He comes in at a time where you probably will get a lot of good use out of him. And there's some things happening on the wind side in the future with the new spear unit that's coming out in a little while. I don't have the highest of hopes for Zidane, but I'm sure people that are pulling for him and using him, he's certainly going to still yield some pretty positive results in my opinion. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all soon.